Hello everybody, thank you for being here. My name's Laszlo, this is my YouTube account, UFO World. Today I'll be speaking to Nick Cook. Nick Cook is an investigator and journalist who has worked at Jane Defence Weekly with a keen interest in black projects, secret programs, UFO technology, which has led him to write the acclaimed book, The Hunt for Zero Point and The Grid. He now has a keen interest in consciousness, near-death experiences, shared death experiences, and UFOs, and he was one of 29 essay winners from around the world to be awarded a prize by the US-based Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies, which asks for the best evidence for survival of consciousness after permanent bodily death. And he now sits as one of the board of directors of research. Today, we start this conversation by delving into his background to see how he moved from the physical to the metaphysical. If you do enjoy today's podcast, do like, share, and consider subscribing. I'll be speaking to a host of fascinating guests in the coming weeks. And of course, do check out Nick's work and content. I'll leave all the description and links below. With that being said, let's dive in. But you moved from this kind of nuts and bolts type background into this new realm of the metaphysical. So I'm really excited to, delve into your new project, The Light Beyond the Mountain. But before we go into that, do you mind giving a very quick overview of kind of how you moved into this and what was the kind of spark, I guess?
Yeah, sure, Laszlo. I did a university degree in something completely unrelated, Arabic and Islamic studies. So which I thoroughly enjoyed. My parents were diplomats, or at least half of my parents were diplomats. My parents divorced when I was quite young. But I traveled a lot around the Middle East, so that sort of made me choose my Arabic and Islamic studies degree. But I left university having not a clue what I wanted to do. I mean, I was totally adrift. And one of the things I have always or had always been interested in right from when I was a small child was aviation. I was just fascinated by aircraft. And so, and then my dad, who was not the diplomat, but he was actually an engineer. So he was the other half of the divorce. He and I were talking when I was sort of moaning about, what do I do? I don't know what I want to do. I'm adrift. This is after university. And I said, the only thing I was really interested in was aviation. I should have done an engineering degree. And he said, well, have you ever considered writing about it? And up till then, that had never crossed my mind. It had never entered my consciousness that I could have a career in aviation where I wrote about it. And the best part was I didn't even have to be an engineer because I'm lousy at maths. So, so that was just like a light bulb moment for me. I then targeted, there were sort of, a dozen trade magazines. I just wanted to be a trade journalist. So I targeted these magazines. I got a job in a fantastic old school journal called Interavia, which was based in Switzerland. It was published in 4 languages and it was sort of gentlemanly to a fault. I was their London trial correspondent. So obviously they gave me a sort of 3-month trial. But I was so happy to be in this job. I went from there to a magazine you referenced called Jane's Defence Weekly. I became the aerospace editor of that. Jane's had a pretty healthy travel budget, so I traveled pretty much all over the world covering aerospace and defence stories. But I always gravitated to America because America always had the most interesting stuff going on, and they were very open too. Compared with the Brits, really. I mean, the Brits were okay, but we're all a bit buttoned up here, and
100%. Yeah.
So the British aviation industry, the Ministry of Defence, was much more buttoned up than the DoD and American aerospace companies. So I spent a lot of time in the States. It's a bit of a second home for me. I'm quarter American too, so it sort of felt good. And then on the side, what I've been doing, my day job, I've been writing books. So I started off writing novels. I wrote a couple of novels. They were published. I was thrilled. My wife was less thrilled because I was working all the hours God sent because I had a day job,
Hmm.
evenings, weekends. And then I went into, in addition to carrying on my Jane's Defence Weekly job, which I did for about 18, 20 years in the end, I suppose. I carried on writing, but I ghost wrote. I would ghost write for other people. I did that for a bit. And then finally, again, you referenced a book which I researched while I was at Jane's during the 1990 and which came out in 2001. And that was called The Hunt for Zero Point. And that was about my sort of quest when I was a Jane's aerospace editor, a sort of secret quest because I was meant to be doing my job, which was covering.
MI5, it's undercover or something.
It was undercover is a bit sort of sounds a bit grand, but I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, and deliberately, because it's sort of hard to reconcile now. But back in the 90s, when I was researching this book, which was, as I said, it's all about anti-gravity. Had America cracked a secret propulsion and energy source which it would want to cover up? I mean, that was a question I posed myself, but it was taboo. You did not talk about this in polite aerospace company. So I sort of kept it very, it was sort of sub radar. I didn't discuss it, but I just kept my eyes and ears open. Eventually I decided I had enough material for a book. The book came out in 2001, written for a mainstream audience. It's designed for anyone to pick up and read. You don't have to be into aerospace or UFOs or whatever. And so that took me up to 2001. I've been a consultant in the aerospace, defense, and sustainability field since. You mentioned the kind of consciousness stuff, which came afterwards. I'd written that thriller, The Grid. So yeah, I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller, I'm a consultant. And yeah, I dabble a little bit in the consciousness field now as well.
Yeah, no, completely. And what was the I mean, as I said before, it's still interesting to hear the story and the journey from where you moved before as well. And what was the kind of moment for you which put you into the kind of consciousness route, bearing in mind you was kind of on the physical technology side before, and you're still a part of that, but it was something that kind of sparked it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So you mentioned in your introduction that I've got a new book out, and this is a very unusual format. It's taking me well out of my comfort zone as a writer. It's because I'm serializing it
Hmm.
every 2 weeks on a digital platform called Substack, and the book is called The Light Beyond the Mountains. We can talk perhaps a little bit about why I chose that title, but it is chosen deliberately and sort of meaningfully. But you're right and I talk about this in the book. In 2014, I was with my wife in the room where my mother-in-law, much loved mother-in-law, lay dying. And at the actual moment she died, my wife, who was holding her hand, she just turns to the room. Maybe there are, 6 family members perhaps in the room. And she goes, "Everything's all right. She's okay." And I'm looking at her and I'm thinking, everything's not all right. And your mum is definitely not okay. In fact, she had literally died that second. And we were all in shock, and, it was traumatic and sad and, all the rest of it, of course. But afterwards, sometime later, I said to my wife, "What happened back there? Why did you say that?" And she said, "Well, weren't you there as well?" And I went, "Where?" And then she described this place, or rather, it was a state of being, perhaps, but she described it as a place which was sort of infinite, connected. It was where time stretched endlessly. It she knew everything. I mean, she just went, she said, I knew what the purpose of the universe was. I knew why we were here. I knew
Wow.
it all, but I
Mm.
couldn't bring it back. I couldn't bring that knowledge back. And I went, wow. And we've been married a long time, and we'd been married then a long time. And I thought, she doesn't make stuff up. So this is for her at least, it was a real thing. I then Googled it. I'd never heard of such a thing or a phenomenon. I then Googled it and found out that it was a thing. It is a thing called a shared death experience. Now, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of a near-death experience where someone who is brought back from perhaps cardiac arrest or some, brain injury, they talk about similar experiences where they are in a space where everything is connected. It feels imbued with love at the deepest kind of level. And this was my wife's shared death experience, but obviously she wasn't under threat. It was her mum who had died. So that totally got me into this subject. I thought, what on earth happened?
Yeah.
I have to know what happened, because this is way outside any frame of reference that I have. And so I started to study it. And that studying led me to write the book that you're reading, The Grid.
Yeah.
I wrote it as a novel, not as nonfiction, because I felt I didn't have the qualifications to write it as nonfiction. But I wanted to discharge this energy that I felt as a story in some way. And this thriller was the only way I knew how to do it. So, but it's based on a lot of things that I know. And anyway, from there, from that experience, as you mentioned, a chap called Robert Bigelow announced in 2020, I think, that he was holding an essay competition for his new institute called BICS, the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies. And when he announced it, I'd done so much research in this field, I thought I could have a crack at that essay question. And it's the one you said, which was provide the best evidence for proof of the survival of consciousness after permanent bodily death.
Yeah.
There was
What a question. Did you come up with the answer? I don't know what the answer was.
well, I mean,
Take too long.
basically, I knew that I couldn't really answer the exam question. I mean, no one can,
Yeah, sure.
obviously, but I felt that I had enough data. I'm a data-driven person. I'm uncomfortable when I get outside a sort of data-rich environment. And what struck me about the study of consciousness that I'd done in order to research that novel, The Grid, but then do background research, which got me to the point where I could answer that essay, was just how rich it was in data. There was data from near-death experiences, there was data from shared death experiences, there's data from people who've done studies of reincarnation studies. There's a lot of data which is not weird, squirrely data either. It is pretty well founded in that a lot of it cross-correlates. So you get, for example, a lot of data about the sorts of experiences that near-death experiences relate, which is, as I've described, but beyond that, they talk about, rich environments that feel more real than this one. When you're there, they feel, and my wife said the same thing. She said, where I was, that felt more real than this place does.
Yeah.
And those sorts of data correlate with, for example, people who've done psychedelics, so DMT and other psychedelics. And so there's a lot of data out there that cross correlates. And I'd spent, most of my career, certainly while I was an aerospace and defense journalist, bowing down before science. That was my thing. But I also was I bowed down before evidence as well. Evidence for me was really critical in any story that I would ever describe. And I just felt that evidence here was really outweighing the science. The evidence was leaving mainstream science behind, because mainstream science was saying this stuff is all bullshit. It's not real.
It's all
It
woo
is.
woo, right? It's all woo woo, and that's the thing. But that's
Yeah.
what is confusing, really,
So
because there's stuff
that is
there.
confusing. It's
Yeah,
it's very, very confusing and a bit disconcerting, because you think, I want to be on solid scientific ground here, but there is no reference point in science, mainstream science, that allows you to be in that point.
yeah,
But I felt that the evidence, as I've said, that descriptive evidence is very solid, really. I mean, it's very rich.
hmm
And all of that gave me the sort of confidence to go off and write this essay, and the contest, it carried a $2 million prize fund. So whilst I didn't get the top prize, I got a lesser prize, but it was still a very nice, it was a nice way to end the year. I seem to remember, with a bit of cash in the back
Oh,
pocket.
absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't go as far as that. I think you was probably smiling as well, and I think the fact as well. I mean, I just wanted to say that it's so, you know, the fact that he's able to dabble into the consciousness and write a book around that as well. It kind of, I mean, it's no one can answer that question, right? So you have your right to offer your perspective on that based on your experiences and the data and stuff out there, and what you come up with. Who's to argue against that, right? I mean, everyone's qualified in their own way to kind of give their own perspective, because we don't know the answer just yet. So I think it just gives people hope, that you're giving me hope. I mean, because I tried to write a book before. I got to like 20,000 words, and I was like, okay, this is difficult. Maybe I should plan a bit more effectively. This was like 5, 6 years ago. But I just think that it gives people hope that it's an unanswered question, and it's the fact that it's kind of depicted as there's not no real consensus around it to focus on. It doesn't give people a point to really go into it and offer their information on kind of how they perceive it and what's going on. There was a recent podcast as well from Joe Rogan with Diana Pasolka. I may have butchered her name there. But they talked quite extensively about the psychedelic element towards it as well, and how it also replicates because it taps into the pineal gland, to that kind of hotspot there, which can really bring forward these experiences where you can tap into these different realms. So there's it looks like you got the root of a near-death experience or a shared death experience, or you got something more concrete which you can actually take and enter into this realm.
Yeah, I saw that Joe Rogan podcast with Diana, who I also know, and she's an amazing writer. She's
Yeah.
done some fantastic stuff. Her 2 books, American Cosmic and Encounters, are
Mhm.
really, really rigorously researched and well documented. And it was a good interview, I thought, the one that she did with Joe Rogan. And yeah, I mean, that they did talk about the psychedelic bit, quite a lot. And I mean, the key thing there, I think, is again that this is really now well documented, in that you've got Imperial College London is doing studies on psychedelics and the kinds of shared experiences that people have when they do these DMT trials,
Yeah.
under very controlled conditions. They're wearing EEGs. They're wired up for brain pattern analysis and stuff. So this is all going now out of the woo, and it is going into a more sort of rigorously researched place, and elements of the scientific fraternity are coming with it, or at least they're bringing that data with it. And I don't think there's any, well, there shouldn't be a mystery in that, because many disciplines of science are coming up against anomalies in their data sets that they cannot reconcile with the established scientific facts. We have, according to science, no explanation for a range of phenomena, which range from, apparitions, UFOs, shared death experiences, the psychedelic experience we've been talking about, and also, things like shamanistic, shamans type, voyage type experiences. All of these things are anomalous according to science, but yet are very firmly and well documented when it comes to evidence that is verifiable. So, for instance, when somebody has returned from a near-death experience, they often have this out-of-body, there's an out-of-body part to the initial experience of the death. And that involves perhaps, floating into the room in which they have, quotes, died, and being able to see, in a global direction. So it doesn't matter whether, where you are in the room, you can see everything.
Yeah.
And actually, you can even see beyond the room.
Yeah.
And so where it becomes interesting is that some of these near-death experiences have then come back and gone, well, I was able to see things on shelves, high up in the room that I couldn't normally have seen. I wouldn't have seen, because I was on the gurney, I was on the trolley, or I was on the operating table. But yet they are able to describe those things perfectly. So, that for me is data, and it deserves to be explored. And I'm glad to say that I think as we, move through the third decade of the third millennium, we're beginning to appreciate, or at least science is beginning to appreciate, that this stuff needs to be looked at in order to resolve some of the bigger questions we have, like what's dark matter, what's dark energy. We only know the composition of 5% of the universe, and that's the solid matter that makes up, my desk, the tree outside, and this planet. The rest, 95% of it, is dark matter and dark energy, and science doesn't know what they are.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's exciting, but also I feel like that if that's not a wake-up call to really delve into this, to figure it out, that should be a good space anyway. And have you heard of, I've got her name here, PMH Atwater? She is or Phyllis Maria de Casa. Apparently, so she's someone who specializes in NDE's research, and she's turning her attention now to near-death experiences that involve ET or alien contact. She's running like trials and stuff for that as well. So there's people trying to connect these things together as well. But I think objectively you're correct in the sense we're moving. I mean, if we look at previous decades and how things are in general, people kind of diminish that towards the spiritual, and it is spiritual, but that spiritual connotation was kind of like, well, this is not real, right? This is a different subset. But I think it's all connected, and I think you're correct, and we're moving towards a more space where we're looking at this more vigorously, which is what we need really, because everything deserves attention, especially when it's continually happening. People having these experiences. So yeah, okay, and I want to switch gears a bit because I think obviously you're considering everything you've been doing as well. I want to see how this is all, or if it is connected to your current book as well, or this series, The Light Beyond the Mountain. And I've read a couple of. I'm halfway through the current chapter, the latest one. But yeah, do you mind giving a quick overview of kind of your mission with it, I guess, the motivation around it as well? Because you've done books before, right? Now you're doing a weekly series as well, or not weekly, or whenever it comes out.
It's fortnightly, but So what I do in between, though, is I will post some commentary, perhaps on what the chapter's about. It's a bit like kind of bonus features you used to get in the DVD. But yeah, so the book is about consciousness, and I explain in the introduction that I'd originally intended to write it as just a mainstream book, but it's really hard if you're talking about consciousness. I mean, we've already jumped into all kinds of different subject areas just in the last 20 minutes or so. But it's really hard when you're writing a book about consciousness to get down precisely what you want to say. At least I found it hard, because the journey that I've been on has been quite, I mean, it hasn't been a linear journey. It's veered off in all kinds of directions. So eventually I got to a point where I thought, I can't do this book, the book that I want to write, in this, hard copy format. I mean, I'm hoping later on there will be a hard copy book that comes out of it, but I want to do this in a format where it can be much more interactive. It can be much more exploratory, because we all have an experience. I mean, everyone and everything has an experience of consciousness. I didn't come to the subject, as I said, until a decade ago. But consciousness, it sounds off-putting, because it's like, what does it mean, for a start? Well, it means a variety of things. It is about how we perceive the world, the methodology and mechanisms via which we perceive the world. It is the methodology and mechanisms via which we perceive ourselves. It's quite easy to muddle brain function with mind, but they're actually two very different things. The brain is a physical thing. Mind is not a physical thing, although science might like to tell you it is, mainstream science, in that it's, all of our experience of consciousness and of the world is generated inside here. But there is an emerging view, and in fact, it's sort of rooted in spirituality, that consciousness is everywhere. It is. It floods everyone and everything, and therefore our experience of the world and of reality, the reality we think of as very solid, is actually, it's kind of more like a signal that we pick up from around us, because consciousness floods everything. And the brain, therefore, is more like a transmitter receiver, like a radio set, or a radio with a broadcast facility that transmits into that environment and receives information back. And you can understand how that might give rise to a near-death experience, where someone is or feels that they have been released from their body at the moment of, quotes, death, and are then able to do the things that we talked about a little earlier, which is see their environment from this sort of weird global perspective, outside of their body. So there's lots to explore here. I'm still exploring it. Of course, I'm exploring it myself, and I'm not rooted in any particular views, although I do incline to the belief that consciousness is external to the body. I mean, consciousness is this thing that floods everything, and we somehow exist within it, and we pick up our own consciousness, if there is such a thing, from that environment. So yeah, and forgive me, Laszlo, because I can't remember what the question was, but I think it was, is this what the new book is about?
Yeah.
And yes, it is the answer. So the book is called The Light Beyond the Mountains. It starts in a very nuts and bolts way. I mean, back in 1992, I was camping outside the world's most top secret secret airbase, which was
I wonder what you're going
Area
to say.
51.
What air base is that?
Yeah, well, it was back in 1992. It wasn't so well known,
Yeah.
and but given I had the job I had, which was in writing about the cutting edge of aerospace development, I felt I couldn't really carry on without conducting a pilgrimage to Area 51 in Nevada. And for people not familiar with it, it is a base in the middle of the Nevada desert, ringed by mountains, and also a very rigorous and rather scary security system. Wires and fences, trip wires, all the rest, surveillance cameras, all the rest of it. So there was no way we were, of course, going to go anywhere near the actual base itself, because neither me nor my colleague wanted to be shot. But we did camp outside the base. And in September 1992, I was treated to this UFO sighting. I've never had a UFO sighting before or since, but this was a sort of ball of red, orange light, like the sun, that came up from behind the mountains in front of the base. And I have to say, actually, that my colleague and I, we were both, he's an aerospace journalist. I was an aerospace and defense journalist at the time. We're actually rather unmoved by it. We're sort of looking at it very dispassionately and going, well, what do you think that is? And he's going, I don't know. What do you think it is? And that's the sort of way we're looking at this thing. But I then go on to say in the book that I just didn't give it any more thought, or much thought at all, really, until in 2017, the New York Times comes out with this story that says the Pentagon has had this secret unit for years, which has been studying UFOs, even when it's been saying publicly that it's not interested in them, blah, blah, blah. So this sort of reinvigorated my sort of interest and made me think again about what I'd seen. And the book really then, that's sort of the portal of entry into this story. But after that, it progressively takes the reader into this consciousness journey. Who are we? Why are we here? Are we alone here? And in terms of, sentient, intelligent life. And but it does it in a way, I hope, that is sort of digestible, in that, I'm by nature, I'm skeptical. So I confront things quite skeptically when I'm confronted by new information. And so I hope that my own journey rather, will reflect sort of the reader's own skepticism as they approach this subject. And it therefore becomes quite accessible, because it's a linear sort of narrative journey. And it's got like any story, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
No, exciting. As I said, I've read on the second chapter. I'm keen to see how it develops. I mean, as you was telling me about that as well, I was thinking, and you just kind of your last bit as well about it going into you're skeptical by nature, and you're going to be taking people through this journey itself, which some people, or a lot of people, let's say, would be in the same position in terms of consciousness and anything anything extraordinary, let's say. Do you think that, that sighting you had at the time, and then coupled with, what was it, like 10, 15 years later, when it got confirmed that the US was studying these programs, do you feel like that was the perfect timing? Because if we're going to believe in consciousness and things coming at you at the right time, and I'm a believer that the universe speaks to you. Some people call it synchronicities, um, or coincidences and stuff like that. But I believe that stuff happens for a reason, because you're radiating a particular way of frequency, and you pick up at that, especially if we deem ourselves as the conduit to pick up on this. So at that time, if you received the information to write that book, I mean, from that sighting, it feels like for you, it came at the perfect time to be like, now's the time to get this story out? What do you think about that?
I think it's a really interesting question, and I tend to think, and it's going to sound a little unscientific, that reflecting what you've just said is that nothing is a coincidence. I mean, you know, Jung believed in meaningful coincidences and synchronicities. He felt actually that there was a sort of undergirding substrate to reality, and if you can imagine that undergirding substrate as something all connecting, that is a little bit like that space that I was describing about, my wife was in,
Hmm.
and near-death experiences go to. It's all connected, and this physical world, as we see it and perceive it, is perhaps merely the sort of the pinnacles of icebergs that stick out from above this waterline of connectivity.
Hmm.
And inevitably, what you will get beneath the waterline is, I mean, every molecule of water in the ocean is connected to every other molecule at some level. So you're going to get that same level of connection. And I also think, based on my studies, that we can affect the environment. So intention that we put out,
Hmm.
when we intend on something, you radiate a signal into that sea of, well, what? Energy, connection, particles. I mean, it's all of those things, but you radiate out into that sea of connectivity. And if there is a connection out there that is meant for you, somehow or other, it's going to come to you. Now, the trick, Laszlo, as you know, and I'm not very good at this, is recognizing the signal when it comes back to you.
Yeah.
Because if we're all heads down, buried in our tremendously busy worlds, which most of us are, that signal can just go right by you sometimes.
Yeah.
It can be there and go right by you. I mean, I'm astounded by some of the coincidences that have come to me, and I'm still pondering whether they are truly, bizarre, random sort of incidents, or whether they have some connection to them. I had one just the other day, and I was driving up to London with my wife. We were approaching London, and we'd been talking to my daughter, who lives abroad, earlier in the day, and she said she'd had a dream about my dad. Now, my dad died 20 some years ago, and I often say I don't feel him around very much, in a sort of woo way. Which but I would like to, if there is such a thing as the hereafter, that would be very nice. Thank you, Dad. It's very fond of him. So, and but my daughter, who's I think probably the most psychic member of the family, said she dreamt about him. She felt he was very much around. And I think he's here, Dad. And at that moment, I look up from the steering wheel. I'm driving, and my dad's name was Julian E. Cook. Okay. And the car in front has a license plate which says Julian E. on it.
Wow.
And I nudged my wife and I go, look at that. And she took a picture of it, actually, because it
Crazy.
was so extraordinary. And we were just staggered by that level of connection. Now, do I think that is a synchronicity? I think it probably is. And I think it's more likely that it is if the reality that we inhabit, which we traditionally think of as solidly real, because that's what we're taught in school. But actually, there is no proof of that. There's no guarantee that it is solidly real. And the thing that helps me to sort of see that and articulate that is when you think of an atom. An atom is 99.9999%, you can add lots of nines on the end of that percent, empty space. It has a few particles whizzing around its nucleus, but that's it. The rest is empty space. So why isn't my desk, which is made of atoms, predominantly empty? Well, there are conventional explanations for how the electromagnetism of atoms repels and they keep each other apart, and I don't mush into this chair of mine here that I'm sitting on, but that doesn't explain how we render into existence all of this incredible, this rich world that we live in. It doesn't explain that. But if you begin to imagine that this world might be rather more fluid than we customarily think, and that actually what our consciousness has done has rendered it into a sort of physical, hard reality, we might begin to appreciate that every now and again, there are going to be sort of time slips, there are going to be glitches in the matrix, if you like, that are going to present information like the information that was presented to me and us on that day, that number plate, in the way that it does. So to answer your question, yeah, I do believe in meaningful coincidences and synchronicities, but I'm also keeping a very open mind on what they might be and how they might present themselves to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the moment you become aware of it and you look for it, it's kind of, I mean, you can't just listen to everything, right? Because things might pop up and you just might be going around in circles. But there's some things where they're like just what you explained before, that is meaningful, right? That's something that is extraordinary. The coincidence with that as well. So it's a sign. And they say that when you're going through these, when you're on the right path, and if we're talking about the quantum field as well, and you're connected to consciousness or this external force or whatever, let's just imagine we're on a pathway. And as we're going past it, we're seeing signposts. That's where I like to look at it. And you get little indications. And for me, sometimes when these little things happen, and I've had them a lot, we spoke before about when I was a bit lost, and then you can see behind, my dad gave me that drawing. Well, I've got quite a few, but he gave me the drawing behind me about me drawing UFOs, and it hit me. I was like, whoa, this is what I was interested in. I needed it at that present time, that moment there and then, to give it to me. So I think it's interesting, and whether you take note of it is another thing, of course. But yeah, I'm with your book itself. Then, do you think what's the kind of do you have like an overall objective? And I know you want people to go through an experience essentially where they get to go through. It sounds like a bit about your journey as well to really get a hold of it, because you've went from that skeptical nuts and bolts type background into this other side of consciousness, UFOs. What's the objective for you? Are you able to kind of give any information on that, if you could lay that out?
Sure. I mean, so, full disclosure, I have mapped the book. The book is mapped for me. I mean, you'd expect that of a writer. That's what I do. So, I have a sort of chapter breakdown, so I know what I'm going to be doing. I haven't written it yet. I mean, I haven't written those chapters because I want, to a degree, for that interaction with the audience, with the readership to take place. So when you release a chapter every fortnight and you're posting commentary in between, I'm already getting, it's only been out there a month, but I'm getting some fantastic feedback from people who go, this happened to me, or that happened to me, or, I mean, as I said earlier, this is something that affects us all. But yet, I mean, what percentage of the population goes through life thinking about consciousness? And we've all got other things to do, but yet, actually, when you do get into it, it's fascinating. And a trillion questions then unfold about, okay, well, what am I doing here? Does life have a purpose? Is it mapped? Is destiny real? Is fate real? All of these questions link back to consciousness and the nature of reality. But whoever gives any thought to that? I mean,
Hmm.
I didn't for a great period of my life. So the interactive aspect of it for me is really useful and meaningful. I'm enjoying that dialogue with readers. But yes, it's a narrative based journey. I'm the narrator. This happened to me, but it's not about me. It is about um, the people I've met on that journey. I mean, extraordinary people. The people who have imparted their wisdom about consciousness and reality. It's about some of the extraordinary things that have happened out there, which I think I'm able to sort of weave a narrative around to give this book a sense of structure. There's, as you'll have detected having started it, it starts with a very clear opening. The opening is in the Nevada desert.
Yeah.
I'm gazing out over a real top secret base, and I see something, and that propels me into the story. I hope it propels the reader as well. There is a midpoint in the book, and there's an end point. Now, whether the book finishes that way, I don't know. And actually, funny enough, Laszlo, when you were talking about the 20,000 words that you've written already, one of the mistakes I've made in the past, particularly when I'm writing thrillers, is I've written too rigid a structure, a sort of skeleton for the book that I'm writing. And I did this particularly with a thriller that I'd written a while back. And that I just realized that was a mistake, because actually it sucks the life out of the spontaneity in the story. You can have a structure, of course. You've got to know where the story's heading. But if you're too rigid in the structure, it becomes boring. I bored myself after a bit writing it. And I thought, let's throw this away and start again. So in this format with The Light Beyond the Mountains on Substack, I am reacting to the readers' observations and questions. And I haven't really even got into the consciousness part of the story yet. But I think when that happens, lots of people are going to have their own views on this, their own experiences. And as I said, I'm up for that. I hope that this will be a forum and a platform where we can all meet and we can talk about this stuff, because I'm as interested in hearing those stories as hopefully some of those people are out there to hear mine or read mine. So yeah, it's a new format. It's testing me, but in a good way, I hope.
I mean, I just wanted to say that it sounds like first of all, congratulations for challenging yourself, because that is the best way to grow, as we all know, and just to chuck yourself in the deep end and swim, and you will figure stuff out. And it sounds like you're like planting seeds for people. That's ultimately what I think a lot of content is, right? It's about planting those seeds to get that question, because sometimes we don't even ask the right questions, and that to answer the questions is when the answers will start coming forward. And I think those questions through the narrative will naturally be planted in the reader's mind, which is fantastic. And I think it's exciting as well for you to go in there and have like an idea of how this is going to navigate, but at the same time, you know, not be so restricted in that view, because you want to be interactive with the audiences and stuff like that. I've actually never heard of anything like that before, but I'm quite new to Substack. But I'm interested to see how it develops, because I've read obviously a couple of chapters, but I just want to see how the consciousness stuff evolves with it as well. So yeah, best of luck
I'd
with
love
that.
to tell you, by the way, but that would be spoiling the story. And that sounds, again, I don't mean it to be trite sounding, but the narrative is really important to me. It's and actually, people have so far been very forgiving about that. I sort of end on a bit of a cliffhanger, just as I did with each chapter of The Hunt for Zero Point, because I want you to go into the next chapter. That's deliberate. I'm sorry, I cut across you. You were going to say something.
No, absolutely no. And I completely understand that. At the end of the day, you want people to come back. That is standard. You have to kind of incorporate some sort of cliffhanger as well. And also, we've got to also appreciate the journey up to it, right? It doesn't just start like that. Life's not like that. There's a process of you taking the readers through this journey, which you essentially went through as well. So I'm sure when it gets there, the timing will be good. And I think you've obviously got the interaction in between as well to keep readers interested during that kind of fortnight, weekly release as well. So yeah, no, it's exciting. I'm going to finish the chapter after we finish this as well, and I'll give you some feedback, and you can tell me, you can spoil it for me if you want. I'm joking. I want to get to it on my own. But for those,
there are a couple of things I can sort of I can say, Laszlo, about stuff that's coming up, and you know, before I go there, it's really interesting, and parts of what we've discussed already touch on this. It's really interesting sometimes when you are at points in your life that you figure don't make any sense at all.
yeah,
in fact, in my case, a great many of them have presented themselves in that way to me. But you know, I think you mentioned even, you know, there were bits of your life where it's, you know, everything perhaps felt a bit stuck, and you wondered why you were where you were, and you know, God, if there's any meaning to my life, you know, why have I gone down this dead end? And it's often only when you are able to look back with perspective on those moments that you go, oh, okay, that's why I went down.
I want to high five you. I want to high five you so much right now, because yeah.
But it's true, isn't it? I mean, you kind of go, oh my God, that felt so wrong at the time.
Yeah.
But yet it got me here in some way, shape, or form. And I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect, which I think is fascinating. And so I'm about to relay something that didn't make much sense to me at the time. But after the book, The Hunt for Zero Point, came out in 2001, a guy called Ingo Swann contacted me. And
wow. Okay.
Ingo Swann, for those who don't know that name, and why should you, was rather a remote viewer. So in 1972, the CIA set up a psychic spying program, you know, using, well, they call them psychics, but they're not. They were really called remote viewers, which meant these people were able to transcendentally pick up imagery from targets in the Soviet Union. I mean, you know, halfway around the world from where they were in a darkened room in California, and were able to sketch out sights, sounds, impressions of these targets. And they went then into, you know, a CIA database, and you can actually click on the CIA's website now and read about that stuff, because it's all, or a lot of it has been declassified. So Ingo was the, if you like, the original remote viewer. So there were two people called Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ who set the program up at the Stanford Research Institute in California. And Ingo was their kind of like chief viewer. You know, he was their remote viewer. Well, so Ingo contacted me and said, I've just read your book, Hunt for Zero Point. Do you ever come to New York, which is where I live? And I'd love to talk to you about the research. And so I think within the year I was passing through New York and I met him. And, you know, this was just an extraordinary character who was fascinating because he was a polymath. He was into everything. His understanding of, you know, the consciousness subject was extraordinary because he'd done so much reading on it. But also this guy was an experiencer. And, you know, I got to know him quite well, and we talked about all kinds of things around, you know, what he'd done. And he said, well, there's only one way you can experience this, Nick, and that is to actually do remote viewing yourself. And I didn't have the time or the patience then to do it. And plus, I didn't see it as relevant to anything that I was doing at the time. It had no relevance at all. But look, now here I am. I'm writing this book, the Light Beyond the Mountains. And, you know, Ingo figures in that pretty extensively. in later chapters, and learning from him his wisdom, and being able to incorporate it, assimilate it, which I did much later, really helped my understanding of, on my own consciousness exploration journey. So that's just one example of something that makes zero sense, other than the fact, it was nice to talk to this guy. It made zero sense to me at the time. Now it makes complete sense, and somehow seems to have meaning, in that way that we talked about before, not perhaps coincidental meaning, but meaning that I'm able to draw from and then now write about.
No, it's so interesting, and this is, I mean, I've got so many. I mean, you're probably the same, and you can relate to this. Like, I didn't wake up one day like this. You go through life, and then things happen, and then you look back in it, and it all kind of adds up. And when these things add up, it's like, wait, like my mum was been telling me to do, like go into media for years, and I was like, whatever, mum, just because I'm a talent partner for a software company, I do all their hiring. I mean, I didn't wake up wanting to be a recruiter, but life comes at you. You've got to pay the bills. And for years, and then I realized that I wanted to write a book, and I'm doing stuff on YouTube, and I'm doing all this online content, and then it didn't make sense at the time, but she kept repeating herself, and there's so many different things I can look back in my past, and I'm like, it only makes sense at a certain time. So what's that kind of, it just makes you, I thought, all I think it does, it just raises your awareness, just to be, when information comes to you, if it doesn't make sense, just hold it there, just hold it in a space. If it doesn't make sense right now, it may never make sense. I don't know, but don't completely disregard it, because I've learned through life so far that things come at you for a certain reason, potentially, and it may not make sense right now, but at some point it will come towards you as well. And it sounds like you've been through something, well, very similar, in that way, especially with the example just now as well. And I appreciate you giving a bit of information as well about potentially where this could go to, with your new novel. Should we call it a novel series, book? What do we call it exactly?
Well, it's not a novel. I mean, it is, it's nonfiction, so
Yeah,
it's
true.
not a novel, but it is, I suppose if you were to lump it into a genre, it would be narrative nonfiction, is what it is.
Narrative
Narrative
non-fiction.
nonfiction. So in other words, I'm the narrator of the story. So and that is the narrative part, in that it has a beginning, middle, and an end. It's not, these aren't just random chapters that I'm just dropping. Each one flows into the next. So, I mean, were you to subscribe now, of course, you would get, well, you're about to get 3 chapters and the prologue and the intro. So you can kind of, read the whole thing, and you will see that, and progressively as it goes forward, that it stitches together as a story.
No,
Because that's what I do. I mean, that's always what I've done. It's, I've always written for a mainstream audience. So for me, it was important that to tell this as a story. I didn't just want to do it as a series of standalone articles. There's no,
that's
there wouldn't
interesting
be
though.
satisfaction for me in that.
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, you're also playing towards what your strengths are, right? You're a storyteller. You're creative in that sense as well, so you can apply that to something. And in many ways, these stories can be just as impactful and provide just as much like insight compared to, just a structured essay type article as well. But this can actually be even more powerful, because you're getting emotionally attached to what is going on through the story itself and as it uncovers. So I think that was my objective when I wrote this as well. It's like, how can I have an impact? I don't think I'm smart enough to write something intellectual or break that down or come up with a theory. Let me propose something which could be maybe a zeitgeist in many ways, in terms of what is ongoing right now, and try and relay that through a narrative, but still have that kind of wow, and where people can look at it. I remember I studied English and film at university. Invasion of the Body Snatchers was the current stuff, the current issues that were ongoing during those present times. And as soon as I heard about that, I was like, so everything I've been reading and writing has an actual meaning behind it, and the author was doing this on purpose. It makes sense.
Well, uh, even science says that the universe is built on an information.
Mm.
What we see as empty space is not empty space. It is teeming with subatomic particles that flash in and out of existence. And that is the nod to the title in The Hunt for Zero Point. It's talking about 0 point energy, which is this substrate, these particles that flash in and out of existence everywhere in the universe. But within that substrate, there is information. That's what physicists are increasingly recognizing. And so inevitably, or it seems to me, that if we are electromagnetic beings, which we have electromagnetic energy coursing through us, and we are able to tune into that electromagnetic information, we're going to derive information from it, and we're going to exchange information back into that substrate. So you could read into that, perhaps, that in fact, everything in creation is laying down information tracks, just as you'd lay down tracks on a piece of magnetic tape, and it is held there for all time. There is a wonderful book, actually, by a Hungarian, and I believe you have Hungarian.
Does the name give it away?
Yeah, the Laszlo bit gives it away. So I kind of first got into this subject by reading a guy called Ervin Laszlo, who's written a number of really fantastic books that, going back a while, but they're brilliant introductions to this subject. And it just, it made me think about not only how this, universe is built on information, which, as I said, is increasingly accepted as the base of existence. But more than that, and this touches on our conversation, is that it's actually based on meaning. So the meaning that I take from something is important. And without wishing to get too heavy, you can imagine that if there is intelligence in this great universe of ours, which a lot of people think there is, then the meaning that it is exchanging with me and I with it is going back into the system. And if we can envisage this system as a giant self-learning AI, then its consciousness as the universe is expanding all of the time through these symbolic meaning interactions that we have, which are so many, so varied and complex, that maybe that was the intention of the system all along, is to build on these meanings and self-learn and expand, which is sort of getting us into pretty heavy duty Matrix movie territory. But it's fun to think about.
It is fun to think about, and these type of theories, they may start off as fun and just quirky conversations, but in many ways it's a start of something that can move into something more profound and actually more serious as the conversation evolves. And I do believe that could definitely, there's so many different theories, and it's great to kind of discuss the different ones and hypothesize as well. I believe that what you're saying is definitely something that can be a possibility. You can't outrule it, especially given the way if you're looking at the way we create meaning as well, we're just a part of it. It's like one whole thing that works together in conjunction. And that's why I think there was this idea that a friend of mine was like, God is probably just the universe. If we're thinking of this idea, then it's all powerful, it's omnipotent, it creates everything. Like, that's probably the idea of what God would be. But obviously we can't fathom that idea. So we've had to kind of put it into different kind of ideologies, belief systems, actually personify it and create different gods and so forth as well. So it all kind of comes together, but it does ultimately stem from meaning, and creating that stems into then belief systems. I actually done a video recently on belief systems as well, because people confuse me. I think that's probably why I got into this whole thing as well, because I didn't quite understand how people would struggle to, if they had meaning on something, just touching on what you said, why they would hold so dearly on to that meaning and belief system and refute anything else, even if it would stare at them in the face. And it's not about blindly believing anything that comes at you, because we have to be holistic and we have to look at data and be logical, right? I mean, hopefully anyway, we're sane in that regard, right? We're not running around speaking rubbish. We're trying to have a logical conversation around it. But even on that kind of precept, when it goes against what we believe or brushes our ego or anything like that, it's a straight blank. Some people just don't want to be open to it. And I think there's a lack of curiosity ultimately around it, because for me, it's like, why would you not want to be open to something like that? Where's the harm coming from? What is it actually hurting? Or what is it kind of being conflicting about? Yeah, it's something that I'm all over in my brain quite a lot, actually.
No, I mean it's true, and it gets back to what we've been saying throughout this, which is this is life is an experience um, in which we very seldom go off piste and question why we're here, what we're doing here, what it all means, etc., etc. It is much easier to lose yourself in the busyness of everyday life, where we don't have to think about this stuff.
Hmm.
Most people don't want to think about what happens to them when they die, um, and that's perfectly understandable. Of course it is. I didn't want to think about it until I was confronted by this experience in 2014 with my mother-in-law. But progressively, as you get into this stuff, it does force you to confront long-held belief systems, and I've got them like everyone else. And if you can be self-analytical, I mean, if one can be self-analytical in this journey, this is the bit I find most interesting. In
Hmm.
that I am. It is an inward journey. I'm going inward in order to understand me,
Hmm. Yep, yep.
because um, that's again, it's a thing that we don't all want to do. And but when you sort of do that and you sort of begin to deconstruct these layers that have been built up around you from birth, um, that can be quite interesting, and it's illuminating, and it's actually a pretty, for me, it's been a pretty worthwhile journey. I mean, it's been, I am fascinated by the mind, the human mind. And again, on that sort of coincidence score that we were talking about earlier, one of the books that I ghost wrote a long time ago was for a psychiatrist who, eminent psychiatrist, was a busy man, couldn't do the book himself. So I worked with him on it. Now, what that gave me was a sort of workaday grounding in the human mind and neuroscience at a very crude level. And again, I thought the book took quite a long time, maybe about a year. And I thought, well, why have I done this? This is not my core interest. My
Hmm.
core interest is aerospace, defense, that kind of thing. But look at what I'm doing now. So actually, that grounding through this unbelievably eminent psychiatrist gave me insights that I wouldn't have otherwise had, which have helped then shape what I'm doing now. So it's a journey, isn't it?
It is a journey. It is a journey, and I think as well that I think there's always going to be people when you look through history. There's actually that Hungarian guy Ignaz Semmelweis. I don't know if I've pronounced his name right. I don't think it's Hungarian, so I can get away with not pronouncing it. The surname.
Okay, I was going to say, if you can't pronounce his name, then God help the rest of us.
You should hear the people the way they pronounce my name. I've been called lasagna, everything. It's just getting completely wrong. But he he come
Mm.
up with the idea about washing hands in between deliveries, and this was like, I can't remember the actual date now, and everyone was like disregarding it. They were like, "No, as if we'll do this," and it's just because it went against the current ideologies at the time. And there's always this kind, there's always going to be moments, and you look at the current movement right now within the UFO UAP space. There's always going to be we got Sean Kirkpatrick, who's playing games, and in my opinion, he's on a disinformation route. That's my opinion anyway. And there's always going to be people like this in history who battle against what is ongoing, the current belief systems. Some have got actual reasons for it, and some are just they just don't want it to challenge what they're currently believing at the same time. And then we get the other personnel, who are going against that, and it's kind of like postcode wars. It just makes me wonder, if we was to envision an advanced civilization, that's why we see them as them shedding their Neanderthal type behavior, which are just, full of emotion, and we see them maybe more logical in that way, because they've got rid of this kind of lack of logical behavior, where we're fighting each other and there's wars, and we're actually taking things at face value and being curious about things. It just makes me wonder, if we was more open towards that as a civilization, where we might be globally right now, if we didn't just park things like the consciousness things and be like, no, that's crazy, let's put that aside, instead of being like, actually, let's look into this. What's there to laugh at? Why are you laughing for? Let's look into this, right? It's something that is always intriguing to me, I think.
Yeah, it's all intriguing stuff, and it's taken me on this journey, and I mean, I'm still doing all the other things that I was always doing. I'm writing other kinds of books. I'm consulting in various fields, and so, but it's fascinating, as you say, and it tells us a great deal about the human condition. I'm a writer of thrillers as well as nonfiction, so understanding this stuff, it gives me insights into human character, the human condition, which helps my novel writing. So it all sort of
Absolutely.
blends into some great big pot of life.
Well, that's interesting anyway, because I'm sure all that experience and stuff will come forward, and comes forward in your kind of work itself, because writing's quite personal in that way, right? You naturally put your own experiences into it. Your story comes through your personality. So I think, to the listeners right now, that's definitely going to be a part of The Light Beyond the Mountain, and any other pieces of work that have come forward. Do you know what? There was so much I wanted to ask you, but I'm just conscious of time right now. Maybe we'd have to do this another time, because I had a list of stuff, but I've really enjoyed today's conversation, Nick. We went through some really interesting topics, which are quite fascinating for me. So hopefully you've enjoyed that as well, and the people listening. For those watching right now, do check out the links in the comment. I will leave all the details for Nick's Light Beyond the Mountain on Substract. Check it out, and I'll leave links to his other pieces of work as well. Nick, was there anything you wanted to say before we wrap up?
I don't think so, Laszlo. Thank you. As you said, we've had a very wide-ranging conversation. It's been extremely enjoyable for me as well. So thank you for having me on the show, and I look forward to the next time, if there is one.
We'll leave it there. Thank you guys for watching. Nick, appreciate it once again. Take care, and I'll see everyone next video.